Episode 1. Wine and Roses. The final season begins by showing us the extravagant life Jimmy was starting to have after being Saul Goodman for numerous years. But as we all know by now, he ended up on the run and left behind his mansion and all of his expensive things to get repossessed by the feds. Jimmy had fled to Nebraska where he lives the life as Gene Takavik. We then jump back to 2004 where Nacho had just fled Lalo's compound in Mexico and calls Mike telling him he needs help. Lalo is on the hunt for him and Gus, but they all believe he is dead. In Albuquerque, Saul and Kim continue their new life together, but both of them are shaken after everything they've went through recently. Jimmy is called in by the detectives, and they want to know where Jorge de Guzman, aka Lalo, went, and Jimmy says he has no idea, just paid the bail as he asked, but he is nervous he will get in trouble for Lalo skipping his next court appearance. Juan Bolsa reports to Gus that Lalo is dead, and Mike begs Gus to spare Nacho's life after what he just did for him. But Gus hasn't decided what to do with Nacho yet. Jimmy agrees to help Kim with the scam she wants to do to Howard, but Jimmy convinced her to tone it down a bit. That won't totally destroy his career, but she can still get paid. Jimmy goes to a golf course Howard is at and plants a little bag of cocaine in Howard's bag, and when he opens it, it falls out. But Howard swears to Cliff that it isn't his, and Cliff is suspicious. Lalo sneakily makes his way back into the United States and immediately goes to Hector to report he's alive, and he knows Gus was behind this, and he's going to prove it. Episode 2. Carrot and Stick. Mike, Tyrus, and Nick all sneak into Nacho's house while he's still gone, and they grab his money and his fake IDs, and Mike puts it into an envelope he's going to send Nacho. Saul and Kim work on their cocaine narrative tactic that they are going to use on Howard to hopefully get him kicked off the Sandpiper case, so she can get it settled and get her money, but Howard wouldn't take any heat since he wouldn't be on the case anymore. Gus seems unconvinced Lalo is dead after seeing the evidence the federals have. Nacho is hiding out at a motel in Mexico Mike told him to stay at, and he's waiting for the envelope Mike is going to send him so he can disappear. Jimmy uses Craig and Betsy Kettleman to file an appeal to their criminal case that happened in Season 1 by saying their lawyer, Howard Hamlin, was impaired under the influence of cocaine and couldn't represent them faithfully. Obviously being a huge lie Jimmy and Kim are cooking up so they can get Howard thrown off the Sandpiper case. Gus visits Hector at the nursing home, and he can just tell by his eyes that Lalo is still alive, and he calls Mike to tell him the truth. Nacho starts getting anxious someone is watching him, and he sneaks out of his room to find out who has been surveying him, and Nacho comes to the conclusion Gus was going to give him up to the cartel in hopes of keeping favor with Don Eladio, and Nacho retreats. Gus realizes Lalo is also looking for Nacho, so he can take him to Don Eladio and finally expose Gus for being a traitor. Right then, Nacho calls and wants to speak with Gus. The season ends with Jimmy and Kim being followed after they leave the Kettleman's business one day. Episode 3. Rockin' Hard Place. Nacho has made it far enough to get some distance between him and the cousins, and when he spots an abandoned tanker nearby, he takes shelter there. He then notices the cousins arrive and begin inspecting the area, but he is able to hide from them in a pit of oil which works, and they leave. He makes his way to a mechanic shop where he calls his father, and Nacho is pretty much telling his dad goodbye, but his dad has no idea what is actually going on. Nacho then calls Mike and says he wants to surrender to Gus, but only if his father and his family are never harmed, and that was the call from the last episode. Gus agrees to the deal. Meanwhile, Jimmy and Kim continue their sabotage of Howard and they plan a valet scam. But the following day at court, ADA Erickson reveals to Kim that they know Lalo's true identity now and that he belongs to the cartel. They want Jimmy's help to bring him down, and Kim knows that is a death sentence for Jimmy if it happens. She says she will talk with him. That night, the valet scam works perfectly, and they plant coke in Howard's car. But when Jimmy gets home, Kim tells him he has to choose between being a friend of the cartel or be a rat, as they know Lalo's identity now. Jimmy is torn on what to do. Nacho meets with Mike and Gus, and they tell him what is going to happen the following day and how he will be killed according to plan. The following day, the meet happens, and right when we think Nacho is going to tell the truth about Gus, he goes on an enraged tirade about how much he despises Hector Salamanca and hopes he suffers every day for the rest of his life. Hector knows this was Gus's doing, and he forced him to say this stuff. But since Hector can't talk, Bolsa and the twins don't realize the truth. Nacho then frees himself, grabs a gun, and ends the episode with his death. Episode 4. Hit and Run. Gus gets all of his men and pretty much is using them as security because he knows Lalo will be coming after him next now that Nacho is dead. Lalo and Hector seem to be the only Salamancas that have any awareness whatsoever, and they both know Gus is trying to take their territory and also branch off from the cartel. Meanwhile, Jimmy disguises himself as Howard, steals his car, and pays a prostitute to spend time with him while Howard's partner, Clifford Maine, sees it happening and starts believing the rumors about Howard. Jimmy then violently ejects her from the car, and Clifford watches on and just sees Howard's car, so he believes it is really Howard driving, and then Jimmy returns the car before Howard even noticed it was gone. The following day, Saul goes to the courthouse and pretty much everyone there is giving him the cold shoulder because they know he is protecting a cartel member and let a violent murderer free on bail. It doesn't deter Saul from getting clients though, because everyone wants the lawyer that got Lalo Salamanca free on bail to do the same thing for them. Saul even gets so many clients that Mrs. Njayan has to kick him out of his nail salon office because all of the shady cats coming around looking for him. Kim is approached by Mike for the first time, and she asks why she is being followed by a sedan, and he says that Lalo is not dead, and they are keeping eyes on anyone that might have contact with Lalo. Kim decides not to tell Jimmy this for now, but she goes with him to look at potential office spaces. Episode 5. Black and Blue. With the news she received in the last episode, Kim has trouble sleeping because she fears that Lalo could storm into their apartment at any point. Saul still has no idea Lalo is alive, so the paranoia isn't setting in for him like it is Kim and Gus. Even Gus is having trouble sleeping, and he is fearful at work every day because he knows Lalo won't stop until he is 6 feet under. It's weird seeing Gus so feared since he has never been like this before. Elsewhere, Clifford confronts Howard about his recent extracurricular activities, and Howard has no idea what he is talking about. But when Clifford says he is considering replacing Howard with Kim as he has been meeting with her, Howard realizes Kim and Jimmy are behind this and are trying to get him removed from the Sandpiper case for good. They want the settlement to be over with now, and Howard wants to keep it active so more clients can join in on the class action and get him an even larger payday in the end. Howard cancels all of his appointments for the week so he can get even with Saul. He lures Saul into a meeting with a client who boxes, but when Saul arrives, Howard beats him senseless and gives him a final warning to leave him alone or he will end him. Howard then hires a private investigator to tail Saul and make notes of everyone he meets with. Gus and Mike go to the unfinished meth lab in the laundry warehouse, and Mike thinks Gus is thinking about hiding out there since no one knows where it is aside from the people who worked on it. But they are back overseas now. Gus leaves for now though. Meanwhile, Lalo sneaks into Werner's wife's home to see if he can find any information or documents that Werner may have had on the excavation project he was working on when he died. Episode 6. Axe and Grind. The episode begins by showing us inside the life of Howard Hamlin away from HHM and how his home life is with his wife, but it seems to not be going well between them at the moment. Howard is only able to pick himself up when he goes for work, and that's why he loves his job so much. Howard speaks with his investigator who tells him all about Saul and the bags of money he is bringing in now. Howard wants to catch Saul doing something illegal and get him put behind bars, but needs concrete evidence first. At the courthouse, Clifford watches Kim in action, and he is thoroughly impressed by how she is in a courtroom, and he tells her he would love for her to come work for his practice as he is bringing in another foundation, Mercer, to help with justice reform. Kim shares the news with Jimmy, and he is elated for her. She tells him she won't be there on D-Day though because she has to present a project to Mercer, but he says she won't be needed. Lalo goes to another worker's address he found in Werner's documents and orders the man to tell him where the project is being built. A few days later, said D-Day comes, and they both go to execute their respective plans for that day. But when a wrench in Saul's plan pops up, he thinks they should call it off. He calls to tell Kim, and she says it has to be today, and despite Saul begging her not to, she turns around and heads back to Albuquerque instead of going to her presentation. Anytime something good is about to happen for Kim, it seems Saul always has something that makes it go wrong. Episode 7. Plan and Execution. After speaking with Casper in the last episode, Lalo finally knows where Gus's meth lab is, and he wants to find evidence of it and take it back to the Don Eladio to prove Gus is betraying them. Lalo informs Hector about what he found as well, and Hector is furious. Meanwhile, Saul is running around trying to fix what went wrong in the last episode, and he is shocked to see Kim when she arrives. We then find out about a huge plot twist, and the private investigator that Howard hired actually worked for Saul in the first place, and he was using him as a double agent to feed Howard whatever Saul wanted. Janadowski then hands Howard some photos that Saul told him to give him to make Howard uncomfortable before his meeting with the mediator for the Sandpiper case. The mediation goes terribly after Howard accused the mediator of working for Saul, but this was all a part of Saul's plan to make Howard think that. The lower settlement offer is accepted by Clifford as he has no choice, and Clifford tells Howard that he doesn't think they can work together anymore because of Howard's actions lately. Howard knows Saul and Kim were behind all of this. Elsewhere, Mike tells Gus that Lalo has been spotted nearby, and they need to lure him in to capture him. That night, Kim and Saul celebrate their victory, pulling a fast one on Howard, and then the doorbell rings, and it is none other than Howard himself. He is very down and wants to know why the couple is so set on destroying his life, and Kim and Saul are definitely feeling a bit guilty seeing the emotional state he is in. Then another person enters the apartment, and it is Lalo. Howard tries telling Lalo he doesn't want to kill them, but this just angers Lalo, and Lalo shoots Howard dead. Episode 8. Point and Shoot. Saul has no idea what to do, and he decides to frame it like Howard had enough of life after losing his job, and he ended it himself. Lalo then tells them one of them is going to go to an address, he says, and kill the man when he answers the door, or else both of them will be killed. Kim decides to make the trip, and of course it is Gus's house Lalo sent her to. She's never met Gus, so she has no idea which man she is supposed to kill, and they all realize Lalo sent her. Mike and his men then get in their cars and head to Jimmy's apartment thinking Lalo is there. When they all leave, this was part of Lalo's plan to get Gus's men away for the time being and leave him vulnerable. Gus only has 4 of his men guarding him, and Lalo takes them out with relative ease while Gus goes down into the lab. Lalo demands Gus admit that he's building a meth lab, and Gus does just that. Lalo records the whole thing to show Donald audio as proof. Gus then turns the power off in the room when Lalo wasn't ready. He grabs a gun he had hidden and fires blindly at Lalo, hoping a bullet hit him. When the lights come back on, Lalo had been shot in the neck and he dies. Mike arrives with his men seeing that Gus killed Lalo, and Jimmy is reunited with Kim at their apartment. Howard and Lalo's bodies are buried together near Gus's warehouse by Mike and his men. Episode 9. Fun and Games. Saul and Kim try to go on with their lives as normal, but they feel so guilty for getting Howard killed, and it's really affecting both of them tremendously. Gus goes down to Mexico to meet with Don Eladio, and he's under the impression Lalo died in the attack from the last season. The only people that actually saw Lalo alive afterwards were Hector and Gus's gang, so Eladio has no reason to believe Gus did anything wrong. Hector is very adamant Gus is lying, but cannot speak. When Gus gets back to New Mexico, he tells Mike they can resume the excavation project and tasks Mike with finding a new engineer and construction crew. A little later, Mike goes to Manuel's house to inform him that his son won't be coming home and tries to give him closure. Manuel tells Mike he is no different than any other wannabe gangster in their town, which hurts Mike. Jimmy and Kim visit HHM where a memorial service is being held for Howard, and Howard's wife, Cheryl, is there, and she tells Jimmy and Kim she thinks they are responsible for Howard's death, but they decline any involvement. We can tell it's really bothering them having to lie like this. It's affecting them so much that Kim tells the court that she will be going to the state bar and she doesn't want to be a lawyer anymore, and her clients will need a new attorney. When she gets home that night, she packs up and unfortunately tells Jimmy that they are bad for each other and being together causes so much pain. Jimmy knows she is right and doesn't try to stop her. An indeterminate amount of time passes, and Jimmy McGill is now fully the Saul Goodman that we see in Breaking Bad, living a luxurious life in a mansion with the hottest, gold-digging females out there, and his practice is doing better than ever. Episode 10. Nippy. This episode will be entirely in the 2010 timeline where Saul is living as Gene in Omaha, Nebraska, after fleeing Albuquerque with his new identity. That is the reason for the black and white. Gene sees an elderly woman riding around the neighborhood on a mobility scooter, and she gets stuck in the snow, so Gene offers to help her and wheel her home after turning off the power to the scooter. Her name is Marion, and she invites Gene in for some food as a thank you, and then her adult son, Jeff, arrives home as well, and he's the cab driver we've been seeing here and there throughout the series. We discover this was Gene's plan all along, and he knows that Jeff knows who he really is. Gene offers Jeff a job in cleaning some of his dirty money, but also as leverage for Jeff not to turn him in. They then plan a con together because Gene can't help himself from being Slippin' Jimmy. Gene becomes best friends with the security guards, and while he's conversing with them, Jeff goes in and steals a bunch of expensive clothing throughout the mall, and the plan works. After the job is offered, Gene then tells Jeff now they're even and he better never tell anyone his real identity or else he will go down too. Episode 11. Breaking Bad. It's 2008 and Saul Goodman was just bound with a sack covering his head by two men driving an RV out into the desert. Of course, it is Walter White and Jesse Pinkman. Then we jump 2 years later to 2010, where Francesca is doing her own thing, but she remembers that Saul wanted her to call him on a specific date. The phone rings and she updates Saul/Gene on everything that has happened, including all of his assets being seized and everything that has happened since Breaking Bad ended. I know it's confusing, but I'm trying to do it this best I can. Even more confusing if you haven't seen Breaking Bad because the timelines intersect. After their call ends, Gene calls a business in Florida where he learns that Kim works, but we don't actually hear what was said and he gets very upset after the call is over. Back to 2008 and Walter and Jesse pay Saul to be their lawyer for their friend Sneaky Pete, who was arrested for drug possession. Saul then realizes Walter is the infamous Heisenberg that makes the blue crystal meth that is popular around town. And if you've seen Breaking Bad, you know how this relationship goes. But if you haven't, pretty much Saul Goodman becomes the lawyer of their criminal organization and helps them launder money and get out of numerous felonies by his scamming ways. Mike is also now Saul's private investigator who warns Saul about dealing with Walter White because he is an amateur, but Saul just sees dollar signs. The episode ends in 2010 where Gene is doing another job with Jeff, and he can't just put that life behind him. He loves it too much. Episode 12. Waterworks. It's 2010 and we're in Florida where Kim is now working, and she gets a call from Jimmy posing as someone else, and Kim begs him to just turn himself in for all of the criminal mischief he got himself into during Breaking Bad. He and Walter are some of the most wanted criminals in the country, and Kim hates that she used to be married him. This was the phone call in the last episode that irritated Gene. Kim then flies back to Albuquerque, and she tells Cheryl everything and the truth about Howard and how he was killed by Lalo Salamanca, and it was her fault. She even gives her an affidavit to give to the district attorney, but doesn't know what they will do about it. She doubts they even prosecute because it's been 7 years and there's really no hard evidence to suggest the truth. She then heads back to Florida, uncontrollably sobbing on the bus. Back in Omaha, Gene and Jeff do their next con, but it doesn't go very smoothly, and a cop starts following Jeff while Gene is inside the home, but he is able to escape unnoticed. When Gene gets home, Jeff calls him via a burner phone and tells him he has been arrested for robbing the house, and Gene tries getting Marion to go bail him out, and he mentions Albuquerque having stricter bail rules than Nebraska, and Marion finds this odd because Gene has never been to Albuquerque, so she does an internet search. When Gene gets to her house, he realizes she has discovered his true identity as Saul Goodman, and she tells him she trusted him and that he's a fugitive. She presses her life alert button and says to the operator that Saul Goodman is in her kitchen, and Gene flees the house. Episode 13. Saul gone. Gene flees the house and Marion is able to read off his license plate number as he drives away. Gene is listening to a police scanner while heading home to grab his things and disappear once again. The police see his car, and then a helicopter even arrives, and he doesn't know where to go, so he hides inside a dumpster, but is caught by police soon after. Saul Goodman has been arrested. He is mad at himself for continuing to pull scams, and that is what got him caught in the end. Saul calls a DA back in New Mexico, Bill Oakley, to be his counsel as he has no idea who else to ask, but Saul convinces him to do it despite the overwhelming evidence against him. He is then taken back to Albuquerque to stand trial. Everyone meets to discuss a plea deal, and Saul tries to paint the picture that Walter White forced him to do everything, and he had no choice in the matter, telling them how Walter and Jesse kidnapped him and almost killed him, which is true actually. Eventually, the DA offers him a reduced sentence of 7 years if he testifies against everyone involved, or else he will get 50 plus. Saul also learns that Kim already divulged all of the details to Cheryl about Howard's death, and how Cheryl is planning on suing her for everything she has since they won't open a criminal case. Kim is working in Florida when Erickson calls her and says that Saul has been captured and he is going to testify information against her, and Kim is shocked Saul would do that to her, but he will do anything if it means a lesser punishment for him. A few days later, Saul enters the courtroom in one of his flashy suits, and to everyone's surprise, he decides to take blame for everything he did, and he wasn't forced to do anything, and he was a willing participant in everything that happened. He also says Kim had nothing to do with Howard's death, and she was just covering for him. Kim looks at him in amazement for finally doing what is right. But this means Jimmy's 7-year plea deal is off the table, and he gets 86 years. Jimmy is then transferred to a maximum security prison, and it takes a while for him to get acclimated. But when they find out he used to be the famous Saul Goodman, he is applauded by his fellow inmates as being one of them. One day, he is told that a lawyer is there to see him, and of course it is Kim. They share one last cigarette together before she leaves, and on her way out, Jimmy gives her their pointed gun gesture that they've done before. Kim then leaves as the story closes. And that is it for Better Call Saul. Hope you enjoyed the series as much as I do. We'll do Breaking Bad soon if you want to check that one out as well. Thanks for watching.